I'm still working on the stream about capitalism and the opioid crisis. That is, well, I've got a bunch of stuff ready for it, but the thing that's actually holding that stream up is that there's a person I want to talk to about the opioid crisis and how it started. And that person was somebody I'm very close with, a family member. Actually, I'm not going to say which one. But they've been a nurse for over like 30 years, and they actually were in nursing school. When sort of the indoctrination into, I guess, pain as the fifth vital sign was really starting to ramp up in nursing school. So there's some vital information I want to gather for that first, and then we'll do that stream. I'm also thinking about maybe reading a little Rosa Luxemburg and talking about like reform versus revolution. But this stream is actually it's a current event stream. We're going to talk about three things of varying levels of importance. The least important of which, by far, is this whole thing with the fucking royal family, which I don't even like talking about it because there's just so much nonsense surrounding it, and I'm an American, I'm not a British person, but I can still comment on positionality and things of that nature. This country is a demon spawn of Britain, so I mean, I really want to start off by talking about the royal family, the Windsors. Man, I mean, they were like absolutely essential into getting Britain's slave trade started and slave trade in general. I mean, they are one of the worst families still around. And you have this interview. I didn't watch the full thing. I've seen bits and pieces of it. And so, again, I'm not an expert on anything I talk about. I'm just a guy with some opinions who does their best to inform themselves. I don't get paid for any of this. So, nor should I be, because, again, I'm not that valuable. That being said, you had this billionaire woman, Oprah. And, I'm sorry. She's a billionaire. She's a fucking billionaire. I don't give a fuck about Oprah, okay? She's keeping you poor, and you shouldn't give a fuck about Oprah either. She's a billionaire. End of. I don't like Oprah. Fuck Oprah, okay? And fuck Meghan Markle and Harry too, dude. Okay, so you have a billionaire talking to two millionaires about how, oh God, I got kicked out of the royal family. Fuck me. Jesus Christ. I don't give a shit, dude. They're getting like $100 million from Netflix for going on TV and bitching about, colonial undertones. Give me a fucking break, Harry. Give me a fucking break. Like, dude, I mean, aside from the fact that the guy comes across like he has like the social skills of like a 10-year-old, it's also, which isn't, I mean, I want to, I'm not criticizing people who don't have social skills. I am criticizing why he doesn't have social skills, which is because he grew up in one of the most racist families in existence. So, I mean, you've got the Windsors, you got the Goebbels who own BMW. Like, I guess that's a fair comparison. They're really just scum of the earth. They're parasites, right? The Windsors are parasites, right? They take up not only like the financial resources from like British taxpayers, but they also take up like mental capital. I guess that's kind of a fucked up concept, mental capital. Like what does that even mean? But they distract people from like talking about their real issues, yeah, like the fact that American companies are trying to privatize Britain's healthcare system. Britain has a public healthcare system. They have public healthcare. Yeah, you can actually get treatment in Britain without going bankrupt and losing your home, which is great, But so I think it's really important to just like keep in mind that Meghan Markle, Harry Windsor, whatever the fuck his name is, Sussex, I don't care. These people are not your friends. It's fun to say fuck the royal family. Yeah, fuck Meghan Markle and Harry too. Like they're super wealthy people who are not your friends. Okay, you should rob them. You should rob them. You should get together with like 100,000 people and fucking rob them and take their house. That's what you should do. Okay. So enough about that because I've really got nothing else to say. Aside from the fact that those people are not your friends and that using identity politics, respectability identity politics for people who are like your enemies is fucking it's a liberal idea, right? We don't treat our enemies the same way that we treat our friends. That is that's kind of what class war is, right? Like this concept that you have to be nice to the people you're like mortal enemies of is kind of dumb. It's liberal bullshit. You don't have to be nice to capitalists. You don't have to be nice to Oprah because she or Jay-Z. Like fuck Jay-Z. Jay-Z owns stock in a company that sells ankle bracelets for like monitoring from the state, right? Like prison ankle bracelets, right? So I'm not going to be like, oh, go Jay-Z for getting rich and getting out of like whatever he got out of. I used to like Jay-Z when I was a kid. The Black Album was one of the first albums I really got into, but the fact is he's a fucking class traitor, okay? He's a billionaire. Fuck billionaires, okay? There's this great song by this amazingly talented artist named No Name. And she's like a Marxist rapper, and she's very talented, beautiful voice. And she just came out with this great new song called Rainforest. So she says, fuck a billionaire, dude. Like, how you make excuses for billionaire, you're broke on a bus. Like, don't make excuses for billionaires. Fuck billionaires. Fuck Oprah. Fuck Jay-Z. Fuck the Queen, dude. Anyways, that is the least important part of that was the least important part of this stream. One of the most. I guess I can't say which is more important, Derek Chauvin versus like Joe Biden being a fucking fascist, because Joe Biden being a fascist gets people killed, as does Derek Chauvin. So, and cops in general, I guess they're both a part of the same sort of neoliberal capitalist system. But the Derek Chauvin, for those of you who may have forgotten, hopefully you haven't, but we all have our lives. So those of you who may have forgotten, Derek Chauvin is the guy who lynched George Floyd, and which subsequently sparked the uprising that happened this summer. Now, Derek Chauvin's trial is was supposed to start yesterday. It's starting today. They're doing jury selection. And, I guess, they've set up like $100 million worth of fortifications outside the courthouse that he is being tried at, which seems like kind of a waste. They've got all these fancy barricades and barriers and stuff. A lot of that stuff can just like, if you got enough people out there, it's totally inconsequential. It's just for show. It's not like Washington D.C. is, which I think is largely for show in terms of like the extra fortifications, but it doesn't actually serve the purpose they wanted to serve. What's in D.C. is actually serving some sort of purpose. Um, I guess to scare people, but they actually have military, like significant military force there. So I wouldn't say that they're the same. DC is on a much higher scale, but these barricades. I made a tweet about this earlier. You can just build a wooden ramp over those barricades. That's kind of. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying you could if you wanted to. But I worry because I think it's quite clear that it's likely Derek Chauvin is going to get off. And on the very off chance that he doesn't get off, his punishment is going to be insignificant. And so I wonder, like, where do we go from here, right? Because we saw what happened over the summer, and I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on for a moment. Personally, I think part of the reason Donald Trump didn't respond to COVID like he could have was because he was using COVID as sort of a counterinsurgency tactic against the anti-racist uprisings that happened this summer. But, I have no actual proof of that. Again, I'm not a journalist, I'm not an expert. That's just my suspicion. Because, you look at the way China dealt with COVID-19. I'm not one of these fucking liberal racists who thinks China's government is like everything our government and media says it is. A lot of that is, lies that just, as soon as you look at the facts from real journalism, they crumble, right? And that goes for how they dealt with COVID-19 as well. They dealt incredibly well with COVID-19, as did most socialist countries. Compared to ours. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And it's not, the blame falls on the side of the government, but also, socialist countries like China, and I know this is a little off topic, socialist countries like China, they develop over decades, right? Socialism isn't something that happens overnight. Socialism is a process. Communism is a process, right? And what that process does is create a sort of collective thinking within a society. And I call it collective thinking, but really what it is just being like cognizant of your community members and your neighbors. But for us, for Americans, I'll call it collective thinking because it's like something that is, I guess, really incomprehensible to Americans, right? To people who have grown up being taught having concepts like rugged individualism hammered into them, where you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And the interesting thing about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is that term was originally created to reference doing the impossible, right? Because if your foot's on the ground and you got your boots on and you're trying to pull yourself up by them, that's actually an impossible act. So in terms of like etymology, it's kind of, I hate when people say that. But it really outlines how unrealistic our society is, how detached from reality our society is, right? How indoctrinated we are. And that's unfortunate. But, back to Derek Chauvin. This dude lynched George Floyd, right? He was on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which, by the way, is something that American police are actually taught through cooperative training programs in Israel, another apartheid state which occupies neighborhoods, sort of like our police department. The only difference is, well, there are a lot of differences, but one of the biggest differences is the amount of time that's passed before their colonial project, right? Our colonial project in America is, so it's sort of, I guess, I don't know if you want to say it hit its climax. I can't speak to that, but what I can say is that our colonial process in America is a lot further along than Israel's, right? Israel is a very new state. Israel is was created late 40s, early 50s, around then. It's rather insignificant, except for the fact that we give it tons of money and stuff. But anyways, that's where Derek Chauvin's police department uh, learned how to lynch black people was Israel actually. Um, so that's a fact. Um, but I wonder like what again what do we where do we go from here? Because chances are Derek Chauvin's going to get let off. Chances are there's going to be no consequences. And I say that out of extreme disappointment. Um, but we have to figure out how to respond to it, right? I mean, I don't know if there's going to be riots. I don't know if there's going to be riots if he gets let off. I know that there are already protests happening in a lot of cities, but I worry that if the movement isn't able to collectively come together and say, okay, well, if you guys don't get justice for us, X, Y, or Z is going to happen. If we aren't capable of doing that, then we're probably not going to get justice. And if we do get justice, it's going to be a messy, messy process. I'm obviously not in a position to make any demands or statements. I'm just some guy. But what I can say is that go out, take to the streets, do whatever you feel you need to do. And don't just do it in the cities, right? Don't just do it in the cities. The thing about gentrification is it pushes people out of the cities, pushes the poor, black, and oppressed people out of the cities. If you work in a warehouse, talk about that. You probably got your coworkers' numbers, right? Like, talk to them about let's go do something. The thing is, we are not like insignificant people, right? Like, we are all historical actors taking place in history, right? Acting as we are actors in our collective history. So it's really important that not just people in the streets in cities go out. You also need people in the small farm towns, right? Like, it takes a lot less people to make a big impact in a small town than it does in a big city, right? And I'm thinking about the town I grew up in. I'm thinking about, those of you who know me from home know what the sort of town square, if you will, of that town looks like. And you only need a few people to start getting attention in a place like that, right? And start making some waves in a place like that, right? There's a place in that town, and in every town, every small town, even ones with extremely small populations, where decisions get made, where lawmakers make decisions, right? Even if they're just local elected people. So my point is, you don't need 100 people surrounding you. You don't need 1,000 people surrounding you. You don't need 500 people surrounding you to go out and participate in this movement. Okay, you don't need to be in a city. You can do this in the small towns. You can. I mean, I remember, and I'm only bringing this up because it's what's in my head, and I'm not casting judgment upon anyone listening. I'm not going to name names or say anything about that. What's happened in the past is in the past. But when I was in high school, there were some person went to a golf field, right? And they drew a swastika on the I forget exactly how they did it. Yeah, I think the Secret Service came. Fuck the Secret Service, fucking Gestapo pieces of shit. They're dumb as fuck. Anyways, I really don't like the Secret Service. Um, but anyways, like, all right, like, well, take that same concept. You want to make a fucking statement. Why not write George Floyd's name? I'm not saying you should go out and destroy somebody's property. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm simply stating things that you can decide to do or not. Um, but it's possible to make statements. It's possible to make statements without hundreds of people behind you. That's the only thing I'm trying to get at. And I think we need to make a statement. I think we need to make our voices heard. I think that if we don't make our voices heard, then the Derek Chauvins of the world are going to keep going around lynching people. So you got to make a statement. You got to make a statement. Every corner of this country is not just about the cities. Okay, you will find comrades. You will. If you do this shit, you got your fucking squad already. Whatever. I mean, like, grow. All right, people are about this shit. People do not want to be in poverty. All right, it's about showing people solutions and getting concessions. And once you start showing solutions and getting concessions, this shit is exponential. Okay, once you start like getting concessions from the government, you get more concessions. People get emboldened. They'll do more, right? So while it may seem like we are in this trap where we're not getting anything from the government and there's nothing we can do about it, it only takes one fucking thing to get the ball rolling, right? The straw that breaks the camel's back, as it were. It'll happen eventually. It could be the Derek Chauvin trial, or in the fallout from it, or it could be something else. I mean, we'll see what happens. But what I will say is that there was a right wing uprising and there was a left wing uprising in this country, and those two things are not equivalent. But that in a global pandemic, I mean, like, yeah, people are afraid, people are starving, people are hungry, people are in bread lines. I think that those things, along with climate change, I think we're a lot closer to real change than people often give themselves credit for. Sometimes it's really hard to see where you are in history when you're living it. Sometimes you gotta take a step back and really consider the overarching circumstances. So that's what I want to say about that. Okay, all hope is not lost. We got to fight, and we don't got to fight each other. We got to fight the enemy. All right, and the enemy is the government and the capitalists and the people who are keeping you poor. Your bosses, right? Your bosses are the enemy. So, and that's whether they write you a paycheck or not. Okay, you don't tip a manager when you go to a restaurant. So I guess the last part of this stream is Joe Biden, and we're going to talk briefly about why Joe Biden is a fucking fascist, and he's so terrible. He really is. He's doing all the fucked up shit that Trump was supposed to end. Return to decency, whatever the fuck. Fuck you. The thing is, the amount of children in migrant detention centers has like doubled or tripled in the past 2 weeks. Biden's a fucking fascist. Biden just appointed the person, I think the person who's in charge of who does a lot of the Iran stuff, who he just appointed, literally bragged about starving Iranians. This is the guy he appointed, right? This is the guy Joe Biden appointed. And he launched that attack on those Syrians. And, forgetting the fact that America literally created Al Qaeda and ISIS, and like destroyed a once thriving country in Syria. And I'm not saying Assad is a perfect guy. There's no such thing as a perfect guy. Not even Lenin was perfect. Um, but a lot of it's funny. Now that Julian Assange is in jail, you don't hear about the fact that the chemical attacks in Syria were fucking staged. You don't hear about the fact that that's actually a leak that happened, that that the OPCW investigators, the international OPCW investigators, went to Syria and were like, nah, and they got fucking shut up. And that happened. But the media doesn't talk about it, right? Because you can't justify war. If you start thinking that these people aren't doing horrible things, right? Like a Saddam or whatever has WMDs, for example. So Biden also just said he's not looking to rake back the sanctions against Venezuela. Well, I'll tell you what. There's this program in Venezuela called the CLAP program, and the CLAP program provides essential food and goods for its citizens, for Venezuelan citizens, multiple times, up to 2 times, I think. I'm not positive on the exact details. A month, right, to the most vulnerable people. Well, guess who's sanctioning that program? Us, the United States, right? So they are literally starving innocent Venezuelans. They're preventing them from getting things like AIDS medications. 100,000 Venezuelans have died because of these sanctions. 100,000 have died because of these sanctions since roughly 2017, I believe. And Biden has no plans, he says. He has no plans to scale them back. Well, that's fascism. That's mass murder. Back in school, so much of what you learn in school is bullshit. But back in school, we used to call what we now call sanctions. We used to call this a war of attrition, right? And if you remember, that's just another word for starving people to death. Well, that's what we're doing. And you were talking about like the sanctions in Iran as well. Okay, first of all, the Iran nuclear agreement has provisions in it. Okay, I forget the exact article. Maybe 52. Don't quote me on that. But there's an article in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, that says Iran is allowed to enrich more uranium if other parties in the agreement neglect to hold up their side of the agreement. So that means that Iran is legally creating more uranium, yet Biden is still unwilling to remove sanctions. And that's even though Iran has said, if you remove these sanctions, we will dial back our uranium thing as per the agreement we made. Okay? So Biden's a fucking fascist. He's no better than Donald Trump and all the fucking... And you know what? I've been saying this. So many people have been saying this. But the fucking liberals who act like they're holier than thou are the ones who don't give a shit about the dead Venezuelans. They're the ones that don't actually give a shit about the kids on the board. They only give a shit about the kids in fucking camps who are dying of COVID-19 and getting forced fucking hysterectomies. They only care about those people when it's Donald Trump doing it, when it's somebody who's not polite, right? Because that's what liberals actually give a fuck about. They give a fuck about whether or not you're being polite, okay? But you don't be polite to your enemies, right? Otherwise, you're just like a fucking fraud. People who are polite to their enemies don't actually have skin in the game, right? They don't actually live in poverty. And if they do, well, then they need to read the Communist Manifesto. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we got to get past this point where there's this, I don't want to call it nihilism, but it's almost nihilism. Like, this individualist liberalism has created a sense of nihilism where we don't actually think things can change. And that's really what that is a branch of American exceptionalism, because we think we're exceptional. right? Americans, again, thinking they're exceptional, like, oh, nothing can change here because we're fighting this giant empire and all these oligarchs and billionaires. No, that's not true. That's exceptionalism. We are not exceptional. America is not exceptional. We just think we are. And the second, that's sort of the half of American exceptionalism that doesn't get talked about, thinking that there's no hope, right? But there's always hope. We are not exceptional. And, I just want to, I guess I'm going to wrap this up here. But I do want to say that it was largely a women-led strike in Russia in 1917 that led to the first communist revolution. And obviously there have been a great deal of communist and socialist revolutions throughout the world since then. But it was a woman's strike, women refusing to work, who helped springboard that into something more. That was a pivotal part of it. And I just want to comment on that briefly, just because yesterday was International Working Women's Day, and women have always led an essential role in getting freedom for others, and we need to rely on the revolutionary women around us in our lives and those who have passed and have some things to teach us. And that's why it's likely, I think I'm going to read Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg pretty soon. Now, Rosa Luxemburg was, this might be a little bit of a reductionist take, but Rosa Luxemburg was a revolutionary socialist in Germany in the 1920s, and she was murdered by social democrats. And when she was murdered by social democrats for being too extremist, for being too radical, not extremist, she wasn't an extremist, as you can see by what later happened in Germany. When they killed Rosa Luxemburg, they really paved the way for no meaningful resistance to Hitler. Which isn't to say that there wasn't resistance to Hitler. It's just that when they destroyed that movement, it caused a lot of damage that Hitler was able to capitalize on. So I guess I just want to highlight that these sectarian battles and these internal squabblings, I don't know if I want to say internal, but I guess that's the only way I can say it for now until I have more time to think about this. We can't be arguing amongst ourselves over individualist drama, right? And that is really important if we ever want to have a successful mass proletarian revolution. Bad things happen. No one's perfect. People make mistakes. Lenin made mistakes. The Bolsheviks made mistakes. Big mistakes at times. The point is to learn from those mistakes and use that to achieve collective liberation. And it also, it's something I've been trying to grapple with recently is like the order of certain things. And I'm rambling a little bit before I go off, but I think about concepts like abolition, and I am totally pro-abolishing the police. I'm pro-abolishing capitalism and racism and all of the above. But, does that come before or after the revolution? Are we abolishing the police before or after the revolution? Anyways, that's just a question I want to leave the audience with, whoever is kind enough to give me some of their time. Are we abolishing things before or after the revolution? I think it's worth thinking about. Anyways, power to the people, workers of the world, unite.